welcome to the show. So today's guests, let me take you back a while here. So I went and I saw the show downtown LA, and it's called CAGES. And a few people had talked about it. They said it's kind of revolutionary. It's super interesting. I'd gotten some ads on Instagram. It looked pretty cool. The music looked cool. And my boyfriend tends to be like, let's go out and do something kind of guy. And so we got tickets to see the show, and my mind was blown. I think y'all know I went to Northwestern and I studied theater and musical theater, and musical theater has always been kind of like a part of my life. This was not musical theater. This was, I'm going to use this description that I read online. It says, CAGES is the indescribable, genre-busting game changer that left audiences in awe at its premiere. This stunningly realized and utterly unique live experience presents a mind-bending, technologically innovative visual spectacle, the like of which is rarely seen in the West End on Broadway, let alone in the off-Broadway or off-West End theater. Let me give you a little bit of more about this. Let me say what it was like for me. So you're sitting in what is, on the outset looks like a theater, but on stage is clearly one performer performing almost this entire musical with projections that look like real people on the stage. Like, I was unsure that it was a projection at one point. I didn't know it until further into the show. I also didn't know there was only one actor on stage. I thought it was multiple actors. And it's not just this like, oh, look, that's cool. They're using technology to have a scene here. It was integrated into the story that they're telling here. And to give you a little bit of insight into the story, I'm ripping this from some of their language online. It says, CAGES, set in Anhedonia, Wolf is a lone soul living in the shadows until he meets the dazzlingly peculiar Madeline. Can their newly minted love survive the dystopian world of control they inhabit? Long-buried stories come to the surface as dreams and reality intersect, and all Wolf holds dear is threatened. An intimate and mysterious Gothic romance beckons, serving up a tale of shared humanity and rebellious passion. So the story is about this place where you're not allowed to have feelings. So if you can imagine, like, why the title of it is CAGES and what a show like that would bring about. And of course it has echoes of things like Moulin Rouge and Rent within the story, because there's this artist at the heart of it who's trying to break free of this cage, right? The show is incredible. If it, right now the show's in London. There is going to be a future for the show. They tip their hat a little bit as to what's going on with the show and the conversation that I get into today. And today on the show, I'm skipping this because I'm so excited about this dang show. I have Benjamin Romans and CJ Baran, and they are the creators of the show. And when I say creators, they wrote the music, they directed it, they choreographed it, they did every piece of the imagining of this. I think from the outside, you might think a show like this is, oh, they wrote the music in the book and then they had somebody else put it all together. But you'll see in this conversation, you'll hear them talk about how they were finding the space, and then they were negotiating with city council for how to get a liquor license for the space because they wanted part of it to be a little bit immersive. And at the heart of this conversation, you'll hear is two people fiercely making art up to their own taste level. And I think for anyone out there who's listening, who's tried to make something, whether you're a fashion designer, a photographer, an actor, a writer, a butcher, baker, a candlestick maker, just like we say in the intro, this is a conversation that gets at the heart of going the distance to make it match your own taste. And I just know you'll love meeting these two people who are just really fiercely honest about how they got there. So without any further explanation, let's get into this episode. So welcome to the show, CJ and Benjamin. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Why don't you say hi so people know who's who? Benjamin, you start us off by just giving us a hello and tell us where you're at.
Hello, everyone. I am Benjamin Romans, and I am bundled up, as we were talking about before, layering in this frigid winter in Los Angeles. It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And we'll see how long this lasts. Yeah.
Just so you'll know, Benjamin literally has on a hat, a scarf, and like a puffy jacket. But we were talking, we don't get a chance to wear that very much in LA.
For no reason whatsoever. Other than, yeah.
CJ, what about you?
How's it going? I'm CJ Baran. Also bearing the cold in this warm sweater in Los Angeles. I'm happy to be here.
Great.
But since we're on the subject of fashion and aesthetic, I would like to point out that CJ's neutral aesthetic is on point. We're looking at the walls, the sound panels, the hair, and the sweater. The color palette is so specific and I got to just give you a shout out. That's incredible.
No, it's
since we are on that
immaculate.
subject.
It's like immaculate vibes. Yeah. If you're looking at this on YouTube, like it is all the same color. He's really giving you the like my life is perfect vibes is what's coming off of you right now.
Certainly not. No.
Well, if we're gonna talk about creative, process, I think what CJ's doing is setting things to the most neutral possible when you come against hurdles and chaos. When you're throwing those things against a canvas. So I think that's a good place to start if we're gonna talk about process.
Yeah. Well, we sure
no
are.
Noise in the studio.
Yeah.
Clear.
Yeah. No. Right.
Yeah,
No noise. Not even
exactly.
clothing noise. Right. Well, the reason why I really wanted to have you both on the show is some of the listeners will be familiar with your show, some of them may not, and also more of your background. But in Los Angeles, I saw your show CAGES, which is now in London, and the show, knocked me down, I would say, and I'm sure you've had people describe other reactions like that. For those of you who have ever, I know that y'all, when I was reading about the show, sometimes you don't even like the word musical attached to it, but I'm going to use it as the closest I can get to what I can describe this as. But I thought of it when I left, I was like, this is the future of theater. And I know that that's sometimes the language it's been described as well. Because I saw a show where I'm not going to explain it. I'm shutting up. I'm going to let you explain it. CJ, how do you explain the show when people ask you what it is? You've had to pitch this thing 1,000, 100,000,000 times, I'm sure.
I mean, I guess the tech is kind of different than the story element. I mean, but we set out to just write a story that had great music, and that kind of led us down a bunch of different rabbit holes into film world and then into tech world, and figuring out how that would all culminate into one new type of artistic piece.
Yeah.
So Cages, to us, or at least to me, is a new type of musical where instead of the traditional use of dialogue going back and forth, we're using silent film cards. And instead of a traditional pit orchestra, it's a lot of tracks and Ben up there composing and playing all the pieces live in conjunction with a pre-recorded 50-piece orchestra. Utilizing some of the ways that artists use equipment and technology in 2022 with the same traditional thing that's been going on for 80 some odd years.
Yeah. And I will just say, like, the sound is huge when you see the show. Like, the sound felt huge and big. And I think a lot of times people hear the word track, they think of like, you mean when I did Les Mis in high school and they sent us the tracks to sing along to? Like, that is not the game we're playing here, everybody. So I want everyone just to really understand the significance and the wideness of the sound and the wideness of that. And in the show, I want to just get a little bit to the performative piece of it. And you correct me if I don't get this right, because it's not transparent how it all works, to be perfectly honest. CJ, you're really carrying in the productions of the show that were in Los Angeles, you were carrying the whole, and in a way, it feels like the whole thing is carrying. There's one performer on stage. That's not actually true, but it can feel that there's only one performer on stage, and you're performing with projections, and you're performing with animations, and other actors that are projected. And so I didn't catch on to that for a few minutes into the show, by the way. So that was also totally astounding and incredible. And like I'd intentionally not done a lot of research before I saw it, so that I could really experience it. And what about the story, or what about your working together was like, this is not going to be told normal? What said this was not going to look like?
You want to fire it up, Ben?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it actually even goes back to your last question, where I think, when you're like, how do you describe it? Or is this normal? Is it not normal? What is it? I think it's just more like, just to go back to the last question and then go on to that. I think it's up to the consumer, for lack of a better word. Like, anybody can think whatever they want of it. They can love it. They can hate it. They can think it's theater. They can think it's not theater, or they can just think it's an experience. One thing I liked about the Los Angeles thing, especially, is I don't even think people thought it was theater as much as like we just heard about this crazy thing. So when you just said like I didn't over research, I like that. I like not having this preconceived notion, but I actually think that art should be that way. But again, I'm not even going to tell you what to do as an onboarding thing, right? But I do we both felt that when people were thrown into the experience with not a lot of, backstory, other than when you got to point blank, like, here we are, we're going into this world, it's a case for expressionism with no emotion whatsoever. I think that was usually when we got the best results. And the other thing I will say, just in a process construct, is, to get there, And again, this is just, it's like what creating is and then what receiving it is. It's again, it's to be interpreted however you want. But I do think CJ and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, there was a problem solving construct in the whole process, meaning this is the show we want to see, right? So if it is a musical, we're like, well, what's lacking? So, okay, sound. Wait, we both produce records. We love traditional Broadway. Where is this lacking part? And then with sets, it wasn't like we were trying to do tack as much as we were just like, what do we really want that to look like? And then that just moved backwards from like, for us, like film references, fashion references, set design. And then we were like, okay, well, why can't they be on a traditional stage? And then that's where the tech actually came in. It was how we wanted to dress it. And then even the bar, with the Los Angeles thing, we're like, would we want to hang out? Would we, if we were going on a date, what would it be like? And as simple as that is, that costed us years of our lives to get there. But it literally was us just, it wasn't simple, but stating what would we actually go to and be really honest about it. And then move backwards into a lot of chaos and problem solve our way out of that Rubik's Cube. CJ, am I missing something in that whole like kind of construct?
No.
Yeah.
That was it.
I love the way you said that because I think that, what you're being fiercely honest about what would we actually like to see? What would we actually like to, because I think we can be stuck in tropes of musicals we've seen in the past or performances we've seen in the past, and that you're like, no, that's not actually what we want to see this time. I want it to be what I actually like. Does that speak to what the process looked like a little bit for you?
Yeah, and we really, I mean, I don't even know if we can go deeply into this, but when it started, we were pitching it at a lot of traditional institutions, and we were just getting blank stares. We don't understand it. What do you mean? No, nobody really understood it. And we kind of just had to do it and figure it out and really piecemeal it one thing at a time, bring people in like, hey, do you understand this? This is what we want to do. Here's the idea. And we really did get a great team of people together that saw the vision and we were able to execute it.
Yeah. When you're thinking, so I'm going to ask some really pointed questions. Some of them you might have answers to, some of you may not. In the original idea of the show of the projections and that you're speaking to actors that are pre-recorded and that's part of the conversation, did that come out of your own imagining, or you said it didn't come out of like a need? You said that's kind of like we imagine, because for both of you as musicians, the music is, I think the music is phenomenal and incredible, and all the things that I would want a music like this to do. It swept me away into this other land where you're taking me, right? And so I sort of thought it was a really exciting experience, and I could feel the music in the floor, which I don't know if your space in London does that as well as the DTLA one does, but like that was key to my experience. Yeah, you could feel it. Yeah,
thanks to L Acoustics. They're fantastic.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay,
seriously.
Great. That was part of, for me, that was a huge piece of it. And so when you were imagining and you're writing the story, you're coming together the story, what in this may be something you don't have an answer to. Was there a point, again, this is a hard question for a creative, I think, so I know I'm being a dick here when I say this. Was there a point to there being a primary performer with others in the way that the story is crafted? Does that make sense?
I don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. No, I mean, I think it was just like us. Even I'm going to make a weird parallel. Just that part of it, as well as even like why do it in Los Angeles, and then why even do the other things you're saying. I mean, it was all honestly just a result of where we were, working with what we had, and when we started, it was almost like a band gone story. Then we really had to stick to the story and work around it. So to be honest, it was just kind of working with what we had. It's crazy. It ended up in a crazy way. Again, like, playing to our taste, but like when we started, it's just the DNA of things is DNA. It's like the evolution of things, right? So when we started, it started with CJ and I in a room at the very, 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 very beginning, like saying, what do we really like musically? Okay, can we dress this kind of pop music that we love so much that has really good themes and something a little more eclectic at the time? Gone to, what if we did this as a story? Gone to, a million different hoops to jump through. Can we do this pop-up that's, kind of projection mapped as a band, but it's still a story too? Okay, now that we're really doing it, we're going to build out a space, we're going to build this world, and we're going to film it in this space and do, but stick to the story. And a lot of it just had to do with how would you do, I think, because it started with this kind of band construct.
Yeah.
It was like making, from the beginning was just kind of what we were doing. So it wasn't really, I think if we started, we're like, we're going to make a musical, even with all these things that we did, it might have been like multiple characters, different things. I think it just was part of the DNA. And CJ added any of that,
It was that exactly. I mean, we knew early on that, yes, we did want it to be a musical piece that could live beyond us. So we never wanted it to be about either of us. But at the same token, we wanted to be able to perform it as a band. So yeah, that was the impetus for having the holographic characters as leads.
And I think that what's so I think what at the time may have not felt revolutionary to you, but I think as an outsider seeing it feels so revolutionary is like, well, you could just hire somebody to come on stage and sing with you. What's the big deal? And it was like, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do like that is, so I think it's built into the DNA. It is in many ways revolutionary. Say this is how, and that's why I think that the show is in many ways such an iconic show, obviously. So one of the things you said to me, CJ, when we first started talking about like, hey, come on the podcast because I'd love to hear how this was all created. You said something to me and I'm going to read it from your email if that's okay. May I do that?
Do it. I have no idea what I said.
We'll edit it out if you don't like it. But you said, okay. I take the same approach with Kate there as the show, and my entire life has been living in the void between creating art that I believe will move people while also trying to make a living at it. And I thought that was such an important way. Let me say it again because I think I might have worded it a little precise. Because I take the same approach in our other work as I did with the show, and my entire life has been living in the void between creating art that I believe will move people while also trying to make a living at it. So in this space of creating this story and creating what CAGES is now, how did this story be the one that you decided to tell? How was this the one that came to you?
This began as a song that Ben and I wrote together, probably back in 2013, 2014, called CAGES, which hilariously is not in the show. And the lyric to that was, "These ribs are cages," and it was about repression and basically your rib cage being a jail cell for your heart. And we both just knew immediately, like, that's a musical. Like that's a whole story that we need to unpack. And we did. And that was the beginning of it.
I mean, and one of the things that I think that, I see some parallels to, and you can say, no, it isn't a parallel, but like people say like, it's like, there's like a little bit of Moulin Rouge and a little bit of Rent and a little bit like, but it is so not those things. At the same time, I want to be very wise to everyone, hip to saying that to everyone, because it doesn't feel stolen at all. But I think we have, heard the story of the heartbroken lover who wants to write a song to change the world. Right. Yeah.
100%. It's a hero's journey at the end of the day, but the show is absolutely an amalgamation of everything that we love. So you could definitely say, I'm sure all of those things you've just referenced, we love. So it makes sense.
Can you walk me through the process of, the show put on is, the track, and then it's the live musicians and it's you singing live. The process of actually getting those pieces together and what that looked like. I think for you, it might seem very like, well, you just hire some musicians and blah, 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 blah. But I think for some of our listeners, it might feel very like, how did you actually go about we're going to hire the people and they're going to do this over Skype? And like, what is that? Is that process a process you enjoy? Yeah. Or is it like freaking banging your head up against the wall? Like this is hard. Or like, and also were you doing this during COVID? Like, can you talk us through a little bit of this stuff?
Then you take this one.
I mean, where to begin?
Heads. If you're not watching this on YouTube, I just want to know they're shaking their heads. There's holding of heads.
No, it's just that's a loaded question. Like that could be 5 novels. I don't even know where to begin with that.
I'll let you know if it gets too long. How about that?
No, of course. Perfect. I mean, well, specifically, I mean, yeah, of course we enjoy the process. Like, which part did you mean, like over COVID? Like, just the whole process, or like which? It's such a loaded question.
The music,
Let me say it a different way.
Yeah,
I think y'all have been living in your revolutionary land of Anadonia for so long that you don't realize how outsider I feel to this, and how much my listeners will feel to this. And so the idea of you not walking in having a sits probe for your musical theater, where the conductor is going to stand there and conduct the orchestra and going to sing along to it. but doing it the way that you did is so like you're speaking a foreign language for the creatives that might be listening right now. I'd love for us just to talk to us like we're third graders and just a little bit of how did you arrive to. We're not even using an orchestra in the United States. We're using an orchestra there because, but like, how did this
100%
become?
And by the way,
does that make
even
sense?
right from the apartment,
Brian, that's a
start there.
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. And I think it's funny. I think both CJ and I's minds went in probably 100 different directions because maybe that's the best way to answer the question. We both had to do 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs ourselves, and I don't mean that in like a martyr way or pat us on the back. We knew, and I guess we kind of touched on this earlier. And again, I'm trying to make sure I'm as articulate as I can because it's a hard to answer because it's such a great question and it's a loaded question. But I think we had to take on so many jobs because there are so many rules to be broken. Now, we didn't break rules to break rules. We broke rules, again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. We were really genuinely trying to make something that we believed in. But we knew that if we were going to do it the way we were going to do it, and we were going to stay true to our vision, that we were going to have to take a lot on, and we had a lot to prove. Because if we did it through, and this is no slight to traditional theater, we, again, love it. We knew that, I'll go through a couple of the hoops right now. If we did it through traditional theater, we wouldn't have been able to do what we were actually after. One of the very first rules we had was it has to have modern sonics. The same way that we are in our pop songs and our film scores and anything that we like. And so we kind of did these handshake things, so we were like, that has to happen. And then I was like, we were like, we're not going to do traditional vocals. When we do fashion, it's going to look like fashion. It may not look like, it's going to look like the Tom Brown 2005 fall show and McQueen's show that he did with Kate Moss that was insane. And we're gonna be true to that. And then with film, we're gonna like, these German expressionist films that we love and Holy Mountain and all this other stuff. We're going to like put that on a stage. Now, again, it's not like we were trying to necessarily work through the system, but because we were trying to genuinely do what we did, it meant that we were going to have to take a little more on our shoulders. So that, like, for what it meant for us is like at the beginning, just musically, it was like, okay, cool. So we're just going to do it. We're like, even when you're asking like a one character thing, we're like, well, we're just going to record, at the beginning, we had friends come over and read our script, before we even had this show. And they thought we were bananas. We were just doing a book on tape. And then at one point, I remember drawing a CAD design of a 4-story building that didn't even exist, but because we had to do something. And then we made these music videos that were stories that were on two-dimensional screens that may not have made sense, but we had to do that to get to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. So, and I hope that's...
And the music...
Hopefully articulate. I mean, it's It's a loaded question, so it's a good question.
That was it. We came in, we started writing the songs. Everything was written in either his place or my place, apartments at the time. And we recorded everything in there as well. Vocals, every instrument, all production done, except for the orchestra. We knew we needed that. But we couldn't afford to do anything in America because of union rates for a 2-hour show.
Right.
So we went out to Prague and we Skyped in to a conductor in Prague that had a whole setup there. And I remember Ben spent like 3 months hand notating all of the parts, every single, for all 50 pieces. It was just madness. And I remember we had our Mozart moment when he was in bed sick, like notating it out.
Oh my God!
We're trying.
It is true.
Deadline.
Actually, you know what's crazy, CJ? That I hate to say it, but that I don't talk about it, but now I'll talk about it now. Yeah, my back. I think it was a very stress-induced, unfortunately, nervous system situation where back went out. So I was like, well, what do? We get a bed desk. CJ came over and delivered breakfast, being the fine gentleman that he was. And I was like on my back. And then we wrote Wolf's. CJ, this is crazy. I remember what we did. We wrote, and I have it. And I looked at it the other day and I was like, that was heavy. But we wrote the scene. It's drawn out. It was Wolf's good dream, but it was when he finally figures out mathematics going to, what are physics? What is vibrational theory gone to actually music? When it didn't exist. And I know I'm speaking about a show that not everyone has seen, but there's no spoiler, but the whole show is about expressionism and emotion. And in the context of the show, music kind of was the medium for the main character, Wolf, to figure out how to express anything whatsoever in a world of no emotion. So it basically takes noise and turns it into music, takes mathematics and turns it into emotion, and, you know, goes from the heart, not just equations. But I remember being on that bed desk and like that scene on charcoal, not moving an inch because I couldn't, not to be like so dramatic, but that was one of those, you know, it's one for the books.
It was dramatic.
I guess it was.
It is dramatic,
but it's one for the books. But we didn't stop. We didn't stop.
Right. You didn't stop. No, you sure didn't.
And then another thing about that orchestra thing, you know, that's a good example. It's like, because you were asking a good question, Brian, like why that way? Again, like with like the orchestra, yeah, like in, you know, a world where it would have been union, this and that, it probably could have been like, hey, orchestrate this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I would have loved that. But because it was so specific and because we were doing these, you know, it just wouldn't have translated. It would be like, here's your parts and play it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That stuff's awesome, but it just wouldn't have worked because we were doing things that involve SMPTE, time code, film, shutter, stuff all at once. And traditional things meets modern things with modern sonics. And we had to do so many things to even get, you know, I remember ripping the sound system, the first sound system out because we were like, this is not what we were trying to do. We were trying to make something that was sonically as pleasing to us as we wanted to hear from the records that we loved. And we had to start over, you know. There's just so many stories about that. But we just, we had to take it on ourselves, you know, to do it.
Yeah. What you just said, I think, is so important because the beginning of where you said that was like, we made this agreement, it's going to have the sound that we like. And that becoming this like gentleman's agreement, like, this is what it's going to sound like. And like I don't really, I mean, you know better than I do, but that you'd be able to make the sound that you made if you were dealing with a live orchestra where you're doing all the incredible work that you're doing through the board that you've done, where you've produced the music at the same time that you're also playing with live. That I don't know if you'd be able to do that that tremendous sound that you, because like the sound of the show sounds like, oh, I could turn on the radio and listen to this at the same time, but in a very, I'm listening to one album kind of way, right? And I think that's what you all were after, right? Yeah, which I think was so cool. As a performer, CJ, was any of this, did it ever feel limiting or hard because like, shit, the track comes in a lot earlier than I want it to there singing wise, or did it become natural at a certain point? Like, how did that go for you?
It was such a bizarre setup. I mean, I also have never acted before and never wanted to act.
No one knew. No one knew that, by the way. You're
Okay,
phenomenal.
good.
I didn't believe you were one person. I couldn't believe you were one person. I was like, this can't be one person. What's happening? Yes.
The amount of times I was at, and CJ and I laugh about this, but the amount of times I was asked, you know, if we could cast CJ in musicals and other things. It's like, who casted him? I'm like, we built this.
Like, this is it.
We built this.
I'm amazed.
Circus.
I was quite amazed. Yeah, we built this. I'm quite amazed that the London show is running without you in the show. So I'd love to first hear the answer to that question, CJ. Then I want to ask you about.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No,
that was great.
It was wild to get used to being on a stage completely alone with no stage volume and be singing at characters that are not there, because from my perspective on stage, I can't see anything that the audience.
Yeah, talk us through this, because this is so phenomenal and weird and crazy, and I can't even understand. Yeah, so for anyone who's never seen it, explain what this is to someone who's never seen it. Would you mind? Yeah.
So it's an illusion. It's a riff off of Pepper's Ghost, which if you know, it's light being projected through basically a double-sided mirror. We do it a different way, but from the audience perspective, it gives the illusion that an image is there. But if you're on the stage looking out at the audience, there's nothing there. That illusion only works for them. So it was a bunch of marks on the side of the curtains, on the floor, where you had to just be exact. Because if you were 1 inch to the right or left, you would completely blow the illusion. So that got tricky. And that was
that like eye line as well as hands to feet, because you're like, it looks like you're right.
McMadeline, I knew was, about right here. And then the chemist, a little taller. So I look up a little more like that. And it's just kind of getting used to that. And then on the more specific things, like when the chemist goes to drop something and I catch it, like that's like a sleight of hand moment where it looks like I'm grabbing it from him, but it's not the case. So a lot of magic kind of interweaved with it.
Yeah, which I think adds to for I'll say as an observer, as an audience member, it adds to the idea that we're in a different place. Right? This is a place where this is normal, because the gesture even became part of what swipes you away into this world. And when I'm imagining there was someone else in the room when it became time for you to get on stage and do all this magic making around, putting your hand here and all that stuff. And was it a choreographer?
Ben
was it a director? Was it
he was
it was
there
Ben
in the front row.
When we were talking about the 100 hats that we wore.
Yes.
One of mine and CJ's was choreography. I mean, it's we joke about it.
I'm amazed.
Well, we can't dance.
Well,
it's not that kind of choreography.
No, but but once again, no, and I mean again, like we're both fans of, just the other day I saw something and I'm like, this is the most amazing movement I've seen in a long time. But like, we love that, but it just didn't apply to the aquarium of the stage that CJ just spoke of. So we had to kind of, CJ just laid it out, whether people see it that way or not. Of course, we always just want people to take the story, and that's the most important thing. But if we are lifting up the hood a little bit, we, doing some traditional thing that doesn't apply to time code and this specific thing and these physics and this blackout and this specific, mathematical equation means in this show, there's just going to be two guys in an empty warehouse trying to figure it out. And any traditionalist would be like, what are you doing? All the way down to like the music stuff, even how we filmed it. People would punch me for if they saw the camera we filmed on. I'm serious.
Really?
And the green paper and our space. I felt bad for inviting people down to like film in our warehouse before it was done with the way the bathroom looked and the way that it looked like a heroin den. I think it was before we moved in.
It was.
No offense, but like that's, and then we're just trying to like make art, and there's this green piece of paper and a little camera and, some decent lighting. And then we're just like, hey, trust us. It's going to be fine. Including Allie, who played Madeline, 4 years later, she's like, are you guys really doing this? And then, because she filmed for 4 days. I'm going on, but like, back to what CJ was saying, the thing, I don't think people understand how, and again, story is the most important experience and emotion. What you take from it is the most important thing that's bigger than all of us. And that's important. That's why we make art, right? With that said, I don't think people really understand how precise what CJ's doing, and what's crazy about what he's doing is that's a fraction of that is, and CJ, correct me if I'm wrong, as much as everybody, thinks that it's like that's what they're looking at, that is a fraction of on top. It's a little iceberg on top of the mountain of what actually creating it was. And it was just a necessity to tell the story amongst many really things. And that's what's so crazy about CJ performing, and I mean that as the highest of compliments of how specific it is, but it still is a necessity on top of everything else,
Yeah, and the specificity that really came from what we are and what we can do. Like I cannot dance at all, not even close. So that was never going to be part of Wolf's character. That just wasn't going to be. Mm-hmm. So like, okay, what's our version of choreography? And so it became a lot of, body, hunching and bizarre walks and that type of thing. But there's also an ensemble. Also,
the bad guys do a lot of marching, which feels like dancing. The bad guys do a lot of marching, which feels like dancing. Ensemble,
they're so good. I mean, they
I'm going to give you a fun fact.
Dancers, and they brought that to life.
CJ and I both play the bad guys. There's a reveal. CJ's the judge. I just said it. CJ's the judgment. He played the judge, and filming that was completely crazy. Yeah. The gavel scene, I was like, wow, CJ plays drums too. I played all the guards, and I almost died doing it. I was on a treadmill with a crossbow, with a helmet, a cone over my head, running, and didn't die. But I should have.
Wait, I thought for sure that was like animated. I can't believe you're a real person. That is insane.
I gotta show you now.
We play all the characters.
Really? Oh my god, that's great. So wait, CJ. So since the show just moved, so the show moved to London. Is the show's on at London right now? How in the world? Like, what was it like to share that? If you're everyone, you must go to YouTube immediately to see. You must run to YouTube and watch.
Hysterical.
Benjamin running on a treadmill. It is.
And please don't do that.
I'm obsessed.
Do not do this.
Wait, FYI, it looks so good.
He nailed it.
Don't do it. Never do it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so CJ, what was it like? What was it like to try to teach this role to somebody else? Like, was it?
Oh man.
Was it like? Can you walk us through a little bit of like? And was this actor like? Are you freaking kidding me? Like, what was that? Was their experience
I mean,
like?
luckily,
how am
we
I going
got
to
to
ever
come into the end?
Okay.
Luckily, so there's a fantastic team in London. Leanne was the choreographer and director for the new
Complete
cast,
wizard.
and
Amazing. Yeah.
total wizard. Deconstructed everything that we had on stage.
So
Honestly,
watched your
almost
show and
completely.
notated it and learned it basically. so that you
Notated
could
it.
get-
Yeah, we did it. We did a film of it on an iPhone with all the lights on, so you could see all the times that I
Got it.
jump off the stage to hide and disappear and like things like that. And she
Got it.
absolutely crushed it and
That's
had
incredible.
them pretty much at like 90% by the time we got in there.
Got
And
it.
then we just kind of went over the things that we learned that went wrong, that you would only know if you have done it on stage and
Yeah.
fallen on your face.
Wait,
and so
pause.
that was nice.
The first time seeing someone else do it, was it like the most weird, out of body, what is even happening right now experience for you, or was it like were you
You know
like,
what?
I can't
It
wait
was-
to watch
it
someone
didn't
else?
sink in.
Okay.
It didn't. We were very excited for that. Very
Okay.
excited to pass the baton.
Right.
But at first, it didn't really hit because both the new wolves had short hair, and I'm like, I don't know, like, is it gonna fit the character? And then they had wigs that were made exactly the same, and all of a sudden, Ben and I were just sitting out there like, oh, that's Wolf. Like that was it.
Wow.
Like it all came together.
Yeah.
I need to throw something else in too that is important. When we first got there, CJ and I were in a rehearsal room, just a straight up rehearsal room with the same tape markings. And I got to give it to everybody in London. Like, everyone really did their homework. To our credit, we did. I remember spending a whole summer, like, making a really weird digitalized script. Like, where's the libretto? I'm like, that's not going to apply. We're going to have to specify. That's the thing. Here's what's so crazy. We have 500 different scripts of just the chemist narrative of recording that. And then here's what's a silent film caption on stage and what screen it's doing it on. And then what's a movie, so we had to deconstruct the show. And then the thing, once and I'm moving back to LA, once we did that, we had to edit to see if he was even hitting in a human level on a story arc level and cut things and move things around. So that never really got like transcribed to a traditional script. We never did that. We had
Right. It's very weird. It's
we had
almost
a
like your
million
actors
whiteboards
this-
of like, and storyboards and
Yeah.
like more mood boards than even anything else. It looked like you would be like, oh, you guys putting on a fashion show, but like, and kinda, to be honest. But like the thing is, like, any traditionalist would have thought we're crazy. So we had to basically do a translation of here's what it would be as a traditional script, but digital. So when you click on something, here's a time code, here is a color code, here's what screen it on, here's if it's recorded, holographic, real, cast, this, that, to a T, to milliseconds. Anyway, I said all that just to say that is how much homework was done on everyone's end. So when we showed up, there was a room with tape, and to the cast and choreographer and the whole production team credit, while we were building a stage in the real theater room, we're in a rehearsal room, and everyone, the amount of trust for our crazy asses to come in and be like, hey, you haven't seen this medium yet, but just trust us, it's going to be fine, is bananas to me. And they did. Like, they trusted us, and that's crazy. Because, that's so crazy. And Leanne, like, just going off of math alone and movement, the only thing I can compare it to is maybe martial arts, where it's like, okay,
Well, I mean, when I
it's
think
specific.
about when you say
I don't
this to
even
me,
know,
I just think,
When
you say this to me, I think about how the every person is a stage manager in the show. It almost sounds like, because every person has to know all these tracks that are going out at the same, like that stage manager. And then also, by the way, CJ's a stage manager as well, or the actor in the role's a stage manager, because they know
Everything.
exactly where things have to go. Like, it's all the pieces. So to kind of, obviously everyone here is going to be gagging to see the show. Can you give us do you know anything where after London, any news, anything yet? Do we know?
Nothing we can share yet, but it will live on, and
Great, good.
We'll find out.
I'm sure everyone's probably already YouTubing, seeing whatever they can catch online right now, because you've got some really great videos out there. But I want to ask you this question.
The full soundtrack is out now. If you want to just
It
go
is?
on a ride,
Oh!
and
Yes.
it's on Spotify. You
Great.
can press play. It's got all the narration. Just sit down and listen to it on a good system.
Oh,
and,
awesome! Because I know
and enjoy
I've
it,
been
yeah.
following the songs as they're released. That is great to know. Great, I'm so glad to hear that. And
Things
CJ,
out.
you're doing the vocals on that one, obviously, right?
On
Yes.
that one, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but I want to ask you this question, and you can give it some thought if you want to. What has this show taught you? Would you say what is or the production of the show or being involved in the show in this way? What are you taking away from this experience?
It's a marathon for me. I feel like you have to really pace yourself because you can go all in and then really burn out. And it takes a really long time and it takes patience. I think it's easy to get discouraged when things don't, pan out immediately, or if someone doesn't quite understand something right away. But just with time and perseverance, I feel like everything eventually finds its place.
Yeah, I think when we look at, I love you say that, CJ, because I think when we see this show, we might think of you saying like, all these yeses just fell in line, and that's how the show happened. That's clearly not the way that the show got made. No.
I can't even believe that we got the show made, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, the pandemic was already. We don't need to go through it, but that was already its own 24/7 economic crisis, problem-solving construct that required all of our creativity to even get to like. Right. I mean, it's a miracle the show happened. It's a miracle that we got through that. It's a miracle that London happened. There's a lot of things. But I will say this, too, to add on to what CJ was saying about the marathon. And I think that's a really good way to put it, CJ, is, by the way, CJ does run marathons for everyone out there. He knows. He knows. But I think a lot of us.
Stress. No.
Yeah, a lot of us, and how I'm going to make a metaphor, and then I'm going to say something else about the process. Metaphor is, I think a lot of us are sprinters. CJ and I kind of were able to. One thing that's wonderful about pop songs is, in one day, and that doesn't necessarily mean the production. Production can take weeks to really make a masterpiece production. Film score, like if you're really going to orchestrate something, but to make a theme or a song, just like cooking or culinary arts, I think that within one day you can tell if something's going to be good or not, which is a cool thing. I think it's amazing. With this process, it's a long marathon. There's all those parts of it. There's many, sprints to make up this marathon. But CJ's absolutely right with, and not only that, but not to be so Olympian, but there's all these hurdles while you're sprinting to get through. So you do have to pace yourself. The other thing I want to say about all of it, for me too, that was like the biggest takeaway is like, and I think CJ will feel this too. I think, and this is not a slight, but this is to myself as well. Everyone has ideas. Not everyone's willing to execute it. And I think that's something that it's not a criticism, but if you are a creative, I think a really big takeaway is, and this goes hand in hand with what CJ's saying, if there are a million ideas and it is exciting, you'll know which one you're going to be the most passionate about. And not only that, but you're going to know which one you're willing to execute. And when you're willing to execute, that doesn't mean that everything just works out. It actually means the 99% sometimes to get to the 1% of the art. And in CJ and I's case, it was stuff that you wouldn't think about. It was like dealing with, going to get this liquor license and going to the city commissioner and standing in front of this boardroom and telling them why our theater is going to happen and change zoning and raise money when you don't even have a technology yet, or even make national patent technology, deal with lawyers, deal with the whole process. We could write a book about it someday when we're, maybe we will. But I would say just in all sincerity to creatives, I do think there is, something. I think you'll know in your gut when something is worth really doing, because I think everyone has ideas, and not only does everyone have ideas, but that doesn't even matter because everyone always has ideas. Executing the idea and sticking to it and knowing how to get it from A to B, that's going to require sometimes 95 to 99% of everything else, because you believe in that thing that's that 1 to 4 to 5% so much that it takes all that other muscle and all that other fuel to get it across the finish line. But I think that's important because I think, passion is fuel, and if you really know something's worth doing, you'll do it. But sometimes it's important to even pick that thing too. Not all of them, but like know that one's going to be worth doing, and be kind of in one way calculated about it, but in another way listen to your gut about it.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because what we were tying together is discernment and then sweat. Like, you're gonna have all these ideas, you're gonna choose one, and then the sweat. And I think that when we look at it from the outside, you might say, "Oh, these guys wrote this musical performance-y thing," but actually you're like, no, we actually stood in line to try to get a liquor license to have it be produced for the first time, and that the dirt and the grime under your fingernails, I think certainly gives you tenacity. But I think a lot of people from the outside, when the achievement level is here, we might say, oh, well, yeah, it looks like it was really easy for them. And that is why I want to make sure that we're not saying that it doesn't have to be hard to be good, but to just understand that that's been part of the journey to arrive at this beautiful outcome. Wasn't just all roses and sunshine and rainbows. That there's some struggle.
No,
and all of that.
that's
maybe
the
reassuring. Actually, maybe
all.
Reassuring.
Yeah, and I wouldn't tell anyone to necessarily do it. I wouldn't be like, yeah, go do it. I mean, the product, yes. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's not for everyone. I know that sounds crazy.
Right.
And just to that, again, just when you're talking about sweat, I feel like, to give CJ a flower, even when I first met CJ, one thing I admired about him is, of course, like, he was making crazy stuff. He was making crazy pop records. When I met him, he wouldn't even leave his apartment, and he was wearing huge basketball shorts. And like, I grew a beard, so I wouldn't leave the studio. And like, was CJ insanely talented? Of course. Here's the thing, though, like, dude was executing, and he had like the workout, that part of it. And CJ, I thought I was getting up early, CJ was getting up earlier, and that's something that I just admire and still admire, and something that I just think people don't quite understand. And it's not about understanding, but it's just something that, again, if you really are going to do it, one thing I admire about CJ from the get-go is like, it's just that thing. It's just like an athlete. And then I think people just think these things fall, we're talking about ideas and what really takes and what the ingredients are, but they don't just fall from the sky. I like sports. People are like, why do you like sport? I'm like, I like it because it's math unfolding from here to here that doesn't affect my life in a risk adverse way, that actually now is therapeutic. But the thing I also like about it is, if you run a 40 from, in 4.2, you do that. It's math. That's what happens. In art, you can't always measure it. But the reason I bring up sports and all that is, like, when I met, back to CJ, he was always exercising, like the muscle, meaning like he was in the studio, he was grinding, he was like on top of it. And then we started doing this stuff, same thing applied. So it wasn't like he was just waiting for things to fall from the sky. When we started, we were like waking up on the floor and then writing more and then writing more. It wasn't just like, oh, we'll do it when it falls from the sky. It was like all the other stuff. And I had never met
anyone like Ben to say on the other end, though. We were at it together. Like, he would come over and we would work until as late as we could and fall asleep on the couch and the floor, whatever it ended up being. And then we'd wake up. I remember 4 a.m. when I would wake up, you had like Hop Frog opened on your thing. We referenced it and went in on it and started writing. Like, it was beyond. I've never experienced any part of life like that. And it was cool to have someone.
One of the things that I'm taking away as I hear you two talk and complete each other's sentences is one thing that I would love every creative who's listening also to be here is like, we have our own work ethic, and then we have a work ethic that also shows up when we have accountability with somebody else, when there's someone else to show it to, someone else to share it with, someone else to say, yes, that's a great idea, or someone else to build off of it. And how I'm sure that was a huge gift for each of you, of like wanting to impress each other and share with each other and get excited for each other, not impressed from like a lack point of view, but like, look how exciting this is. And I'm sure that was such a huge piece of what allowed it to birth itself in this way, right? The creativity in that way.
Absolutely.
I think that's a
honestly,
great, go.
I was going to say, one other thing that, just to kind of tie that last statement up, a lot of times people have asked us, like, well, what, like who told you to do it? Like, or who, how did you get it to the next thing? And I think we just didn't really ask permission at all, because if we did, and when we did, it was just no. So we had no expectations on the end. We just wanted to see through the idea and just see what would happen. And that was it. I think you just have to just do it.
Yeah.
And either it'll be received positively or negatively, but you just got to do it.
I love it.
Yeah, you got to do it. And when we were talking about accountability, Brian, because you brought something up that I think that might be also helpful for anyone that's a creative. If you are working with someone, there is something that you said, because there's going to be a point where if you do, get fortunate enough to, after all the work, to be able to have it go into, now it's public, right? Now it's being received by other people. But you said something that's actually really important, I think, for creatives, and that is that if you are working with people and you trust them, CJ and I were we were literally, like I said earlier, trying to play to these tastes, and we stuck to these rules. And with that, you said something that's actually really important, to just try to blow each other's minds within that rule book. So CJ and I, even with a sense of humor, often, I mean, you should see our, well, no, you should not. No one should ever see our bullpen of the script, but that's a good, there's a lot of humor in it, and there's a lot of banana stuff, but that's important. I just wanted to bring that up because I do, again, if there's going to be good takeaways, if you are creating, I think it's important to talk about that. It is good to be hilarious and try to blow the other person's mind if there's any teamwork involved, when you know what it actually is that you're working for, because one, it makes the process more enjoyable, but two, I think you brought something that's important up, because at the beginning, you're not going to get praise from anyone. You're not going to blow anyone's mind. You're going to blow the other person's mind. You're going to just keep trying to do it until you go, okay, check mark, that does go to the taste.
Yes.
Okay, we'll put that in. But I think it's a really good point what you brought up, because I think that before, and not that it matters if it's public or not or this or that, but when we're talking about process here, you do need to, it's good to be able to do that. It's good to be able to do it alone, but if you're working with a team, I think and when you know what the bar is, it's good to have a great time with that. And also, while trying to blow someone's mind, be vulnerable enough to fall on her face. CJ will attest, he has seen the worst of the worst of the worst, chaotic, some of the ideas that will never, there's the bullpen of the script, there's the bullpen of the characters, there's this deleted scene, there is the worst fashion decision I've ever made in the dressing room, and that Christmas party that we had. No, I'm just kidding. But it's
that was a great decision.
Well, thank you. I was just trying to, blow other people's minds and your mind. But the thing is, I think that it's before, or even when it does go public, to still keep that nucleus and that whole I don't even know how to explain it, but that safe space. Keep it where it is, where you can fail just as bad as you can succeed and blow people's minds, and do both. Because if you don't, you won't let the ideas out, and you won't be able to bat it back and forth to get to that thing that is the bar of taste. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I think that's I think it's a great way to kind of end this conversation, because I think what it also means is you don't need to go it alone. Which I think is a great way to live with all the creatives here. Is this is, running a relay race around creativity is a great way to think about it in some ways of one-upping each other. So I know a lot of people are going to be already heading over to Spotify to listen. And is there an Instagram or website they can also be following along with for the show, and for both of you? Where should that be?
Yeah, at CAGES DTLA is the Instagram. That's kind of the home base one. There's a CAGES London one as well. And I'm sure the upcoming markets will be new ones for those as well.
Right. And then for people who are just wanting to know more about the two of you, is there anywhere else they could be looking for that? Is there a website?
Oh man, don't look at Google Images.
You got a different haircut. You got a different haircut in your earlier days.
Well, since we were talking about blowing each other's minds and also having comedic release and falling on our face, CJ and I occasionally, occasionally would just for no reason pull up our former haircuts. And at one point, this is a funny thing, we both had birthdays 3 days apart, and we there was a cake one time that went down in history where it had, depending on the demographic, our best or worst haircuts of all time on the same cake.
Wait, this is a whole separate podcast episode. I feel like we need to do another
whole podcast, but we were speechless. But anyway, I think the creative takeaway is have that haircut and own it. And then progress.
This has been a great conversation. After the haircut, anything else is a win. Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, we will make sure we link to all of these things in the show notes here today. I want to thank you both for being here and really letting us go under the hood at your creative process and being really honest about that and fiercely just giving us an inside peek at that. And I'm just wish so much more success to the two of you and for the show as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Brian. That's so great.
Thanks, Brian.